Is there anything you could say to emergency managers on helping them to prepare their counties?
Well, some of the, and this gets to be very basic, but FEMA does have their online independent study courses, and it's very basic information. It's a small fraction of the information that you would gain over, say, a decade of experience in education, but it is sufficient to train a person in and give them enough knowledge on how to survive. Because basically, again, if you're away from the blast area, the only threat you're facing is that of radiation. And it's very easy to shield yourself from radiation for sufficient length of time for the radiation rates to decay. You don't need to shelter indefinitely or even very long. It may be just a matter of days, say 2 to 5 days. Under very extraordinary conditions, it might be as long as 2 weeks, but those would be the exception rather than the rule. There are other additional helps out there, and you've referenced this before, but Creston Kearney wrote Nuclear War Survival Skills, which is available online. It is an excellent reference. So in answer to your question, I would go and first look at the FEMA independent study courses, and then either get the print copy so you can read it, or the online version of Nuclear War Survival Skills.
You say you've done this for 300,000 people with very little money, and do you have the support of the county commission and the mayor, and what's the cost?
We enjoy the support of our mayor and our county commission. We've always had that, not just for our radiological protection program, but for all aspects of our emergency management program. So in that, we're very blessed. And as far as the public, when we approach them for the use of their shelters and also to solicit them to attend our training, we ran virtually into no negative feelings at all. There were a couple building owners who declined to participate, but it was, one I guess was based on a corporate refusal at higher levels. Another building was being renovated and the owner didn't think it appropriate. But there were there's no hostile feelings at all. Once we explained to them that this was a program that in the event of a nuclear detonation, a very high level radiation event, that it would be for the protection of not only themselves, because we did make it perfectly clear to them that when we say it's a public shelter, that includes the owner's employees, the owner's families, their in-laws, their relatives, their friends who live on the block. They're all members of the public too, and they have the advantage of coming to their own shelter that they're very familiar with. So we made no bones about it that if it is first come, first serve, and they're welcome to use their own shelter. And that's a plus for us because they're not only familiar with the building, but that gives us a cadre, especially if the volunteers are trained or on their staff, almost an instant shelter staff. So that would be much to our advantage, and that would serve the public well in having an organized staff ready to operate a shelter.
Can you give me an estimate of what this cost?
I can give you an estimate. It cost perhaps half a man-year of my time. And the engineer that we contracted with to do the survey was for, I believe, $35,000. So we're talking about perhaps less than $70,000. In our training materials, we reprinted a number of out-of-print FEMA manuals, and that was several $1,000s worth of printing costs involved. But I would say on the just as a ballpark estimate, less than $70,000, and half of that was for the surveys.
And how many casualties would this prevent, do you think?
Well, let's put it this way: if we could, we'll just give two extreme examples. If Huntsville was subjected to, say, just a few hundred Roentgens total exposure, we could anticipate maybe 20% or more deaths of people who are outside and unsheltered. If it was a higher range of radiation, say, and again, the point where the median lethal exposure is 450 Roentgens, if it was an exposure on that order of magnitude, half the people exposed would die, and you're talking now, say, 150,000 people. By going into shelter and staying there, again, if they're perfectly sheltered, that cuts the fatalities to probably less on the order of less than 5%. So that's go from 50% to less than 5%, more than tenfold decrease in the rate of deaths.
How many casualties could this prevent?
The people who are in sheltered, who are and have been sheltered from the radiation, would have extremely low rates of injury, radiation injury. And the savings there, and not just talking about putting a dollar figure on life, but they don't have to have extensive medical attention later. Whereas I mentioned the median lethal exposure is at 450 Roentgens is 50%. Okay, the other 50% would have to have heroic medical measures to restore them to health, not to mention long convalescence. You're right, for a very small amount of expenditure, we can prevent huge amounts of injury and death.
I think there's close to 3,000 counties in the U.S. What is keeping others from preparing like you?
I can't answer that. I really don't know, except to say that there is inertia here. There is a perception that there is no nuclear threat. But on the other hand, Al-Qaeda and others have made it very plain that they would use nuclear weapons if they had them. There is, I think, a real and growing threat of the use of nuclear weapons. I'd like to see the Department of Homeland Defense continue to shift their emphasis from biological and chemical to increase the radiological nuclear component of their responsibilities. And we are more than willing to share our materials and resources and knowledge with other counties who would, or the government if they are interested, to push this program along. I think it's very, very needed.
I think this is a historic action you've taken and could save many lives here in Huntsville-Madison County. And I'd like to thank you for sharing your work.
Steve, my pleasure. Thank you.
Kirk, thanks a lot. You've been a real inspiration for myself and I think for a lot of people out there.